Hey, what's going on, everybody? You made it to Friday. It is the weekend. We got one more show for you guys to wrap up the week. I'm Jesse Montano. I'm going to be joined by Meghan Angley here in just a few moments. This is Gorilla Sports Off Ice, and I do, as always, want to start by reminding you guys about our great friends over at Trusted American Mortgage. Head on over trustedamerican.com/sports. They want to help you lower your interest rate, get a better monthly payment, and maybe if you act right now, might even be able to help you stick a couple months of mortgage payments right back in your own pocket. Great time of year for that. So head on over trustedamerican.com/sports. See how much money they can help you start saving today. Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show. That actually lined up pretty well with show. Oh. Yeah, no, it was a crazy morning.
Wow.
How's it going, everybody? We just decided that we were going to have our own conversation when the show started.
Perfect timing.
Yeah. I'm Jesse Montano. She's Meghan Angley. This is Gorilla Sports Off Ice Friday edition. John back behind the glass again today. How about some love for John in the chat, holding it down for us while Chloe's been out behind the board. We love John, and he's always got our back. Meghan, what's going on? What do you got going this weekend?
It's actually pretty quiet.
Nice.
In a great way. I've had so much stuff going on the last couple of weekends. It's my first weekend where I don't have anything I have to be doing.
Nice. Nothing that like your presence isn't expected anywhere.
Yeah, and there were things I was doing to help out family the last couple of weekends too, and so just the coordination of it, all that. It is really nice to have nothing that I need to do.
I feel you. How was your concert last Friday? We never talked about this.
Really beautiful.
I bet it was.
I'd seen on Facebook the advertisements for these candlelit concerts, and I didn't know that's what I was going to. I was surprised with these tickets at the last minute. So beautiful music, beautiful venue setting, and I see they have a Fleetwood Mac night coming up. I think I got to go back.
So it's, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was like an orchestra, right? Like
yes.
It was.
So this was actually a quartet. It was a little
nice. Yeah.
Little presence. That's not the way to describe that. But
no,
it was four women.
Yeah.
And
but it wasn't like a big 100-piece orchestra or anything like that.
No, it wasn't that big, but it was really cool. And I recognized a lot of the music because it was from the musician who created music for a lot of the Studio Ghibli films. And I grew up watching all of them. So I recognized music. It was very nostalgic. And that was very cool.
We were parting ways from the studio last week. I had some friends coming over that Meghan has met before. So I said, hey, if you want to stop by, come hang out. And she was like, I'm going to this like orchestra concert. And I was like, secretly, I love that music.
I forgot you played an instrument growing up. So like secret band nerd Jesse absolutely would love this.
And you know what's so funny about that is it wasn't until honestly just the last few years I find it very soothing.
Yeah.
Very relaxing. Now, I have definitely found classical music that is like chaotic and like I can't listen to it.
Like swarming bumblebee music.
Yeah. Or it's just like you can tell that this like this accompanied some type of play or show or whatever, where there was a scene where swarming bumblebee type thing. So I have definitely found some that I'm like, that's not what I'm going for, but I do just love the kind of rhythmic, very tranquil, and I'm sure you add candlelight into that. I bet it was awesome.
Very unsurprised to learn they're not real candles with flames.
Right.
Probably good thing. But because I saw a few knocked over, it's like, yeah, that's probably why we can't have this. Just kind of hoping they'd be real flames, but
alas. We're gonna get into the I almost said the calendar, basically the calendar. We're gonna get into the Avs schedule here in the back half of the show today, but we're gonna go over key dates, things to look for. It's a weird schedule this year. with the Olympic break added in there. Things are compressed in a way they haven't been in several years. So we're going to get into all that, talk about just some key dates, some interesting kind of factoids on the Avs calendar coming up for this year. I did it again. But we are going to start with something that we talked about that we wanted to get into earlier in the week. Was it 2 weeks ago now since the verdict? Or was it last week?
Yeah.
It feels like it was last week, but I think it was 2 weeks ago.
I thought it was last week. I don't know.
What are days? What are days anymore? Point being, the verdict finally came down in the Hockey Canada sexual assault case that took place at the WJCs back in 2018, 2017.
2018.
And this is something that had a significant impact on the hockey world. And it was something that was discussed a lot. There were 5 players who had contracts terminated by NHL teams. So this was something that really kind of, in my opinion, from my view, shook the foundation of the hockey world, because it kind of showed that there was, in my opinion, even before the verdict came down, it showed a real flaw and a real, what's the word I'm looking for here? It kind of exposed the coming up process for a lot of young hockey players who leave home at a young age and are entrusted to whether it be billets or different organizations and things like that. And I even remember growing up playing hockey and even thinking like, that is crazy. Like, at 14, 15, 16 years old, there's guys that, who are leaving. It's like, you're leaving home at 15 years old. That seems crazy. And to me, that was something that when all of this first came down was one of the thoughts that went through my head of, this kind of weird thing that everyone in hockey is just always accepted about the way that you grow and develop in the sport. There's a big flaw here in the way that some of these young men are overseen, maybe in some of the way that they're treated and entitlement, or given a lot of entitlement. Where I'm going with all of this, Megan, is we're not talking about this because we like talking about uncomfortable, subjects and topics and things like that, and things that, are triggering to some. It's not going to be a conversation for everybody, but this is something that you and I both felt, while not only, being very important and having very real life consequences and meaning, but the way that it related to what, the world that you and I live in every day, the hockey space, and just the way that it affected everybody, and the way that kind of the hockey world was watching and hanging on this, and what's going to happen, and, accountability and justice and all that stuff. And so you and I just felt that it wouldn't be appropriate for us to act like it didn't happen.
Right.
So we're going to unpack it today. We're going to talk about it. What happened, why what I described to someone here in the office as maybe an unsurprising verdict. But we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about the elements of the case that we feel are prudent to what you and I do on our day to day and how it affects everyone, around us. And then we're going to get back into the less serious stuff. We're going to talk about the schedule and stuff, but you and I just felt that, like I said, it would be inappropriate for us to not at least acknowledge it, given that this was the number one story in the hockey world for a stretch of time there. Do you have anything you want to add before I kind of just start and turn the floor over to you a lot?
Yeah, I wanted to give people some of my lore. I don't know if I've shared this with anyone, but for one, I really appreciate you giving me and us the platform to talk about it. I didn't even have to ask you, right? It was just instinctively what you wanted to do to make sure that we talked about this at some point. So I really appreciate that. And to give a little bit of my lore, I don't know if people know this about me, but when I was a freshman at the University of Denver, we're required to do a first-year seminar program. And I had signed up for one that was going to work with young women in the metro area as a mentor. And at the last minute, the partner that we worked with to do this, something fell through. So we had to pivot our first year seminar topic completely at the last minute. And so it pivoted to something that still fell under the umbrella of gender and women's studies, because that's sort of the genre, the department that it fell under originally for everyone who had signed up. And it became a topic of research, a research project, and ways in which men on campus could be allies to women with respect to issues like sexual assault. That's obviously pretty niche, but in the boots on the ground research that we were doing in this first year seminar, it yielded a lot of interesting information. You know, we were talking with our peers, and I became really passionate about this research. It eventually gave rise to the Center for Advocacy, Prevention, and Education at the University of Denver, which is a campus resource to this day. And so I conducted this research, and I gave presentations to my classmates about this very topic. And so I was really immersed in the research around this time and around this topic, because it covers a lot of ground more broadly, especially CAPE at DU. It involves topics of sexual assault, cases of domestic violence, harassment, stalking, and just generally is a resource for students who might need counseling and advocacy help. I found the education around these topics to be lacking too in going through orientation as a freshman. When it got to the topic of consent, I found there to be too much gray area, and it left me wanting this to be something that is more standardized in its definition. And similarly, though, we were given educational tools as freshmen around things like how the body processes alcohol, just kind of generally giving people who are away from home for the first time these valuable pieces of information. So at this time, I'm a student, I'm immersed in this research, and it's something that I'm very passionate about to this day. I am also connecting with my peers, and simultaneously, the research is being mirrored back to me in the women that I know and the stories that they share with me.
Can I interrupt you real fast? Just because you just said something that I think is so important and stuff, and something that people miss a lot, and not just when it relates to this. And I apologize for cutting you off, but it's because I was having a conversation with my mom yesterday, and without needing to go too far into it, we were talking about a pretty distant family member, who was recently released from prison. Did something really dumb when he was 18.
Yeah.
And the conversation that my mom and I were having was, like, on one hand, you say he's an 18-year-old kid. Dumb mistake, did something stupid. And the conversation that her and I were just having, just in general, neither of us were arguing either point of, like, it is interesting because this guy who got arrested when he was 18, out of prison at 36, lost a lot of his life. And it's like, yes, kids are young and kids do dumb things. But there has to be accountability for that kind of stuff. But it was when you just said education, you do wonder, and again, like I said, I'm not even saying specific to what we're about to talk about in the Hockey Canada trial, but like, how much could further education better so many young people that do such incredibly stupid, harmful things? And it's like, my goodness, if you were a little bit better educated and you had access to some of these resources, or not have access, if you use some of these resources, how much would we see it diminish in, like I said, not just sexual assault crime, but just crime. And so when you were talking about, being able to get those resources and education and finding a lack of education in some of these tools and resources, I just think that's so incredibly important. It's something that I hope, if nothing else, if you turn this episode off after we say this, I hope you take out of this, like, teach yourself, make sure that you're educated, educate your kids as they're getting ready to leave for the first time, which I think is an important theme of this case in particular. So I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to say education, because I know that there's a lot of people out there that say these were young kids, they made a mistake, you can't punish them for the rest of their life. And sure, can't punish someone forever, but there's like I said, I was having this conversation in a very different context yesterday. Yes, you can say that. There's levels of accountability, and you've got to educate yourself. I don't care how old you are. You've got to educate yourself so that you can be responsible for what you do, your decisions that you make.
It's true, because we're going to use the word culture a lot today, and we're talking about hockey culture, but culture is societal, right? It is the framework that exists around us, and we are the culture makers. And so it is important for us to stay curious, and we don't exist within the parameters of a court of law. And so we can be subjective and apply critical thinking and come to conclusions based on what we feel, and then influence culture in how we talk about these things. It's important to stay talking about them, to continue to think critically, to assign proper weight to things, and evaluate things through an unemotional lens at times, and practice empathy at other times. Like in culture, there's a place for both. And that's certainly true of this case. And so the other disclaimer at the start of this is the nature of what we're talking about is very difficult. So for people who might be listening casually at work, some of what we talk about can be graphic in nature and a bit jarring. So it might not be the best time of day to tune into this conversation. But going back to us being the culture makers, I still invite you to come and listen at a different time. And similarly, if this is understandably upsetting to somebody, I want to be as tasteful, tactful, and intentional as possible. But some of what we discuss at points might be a bit jarring and graphic in nature.
Now, here's the one last thing that I want to say before we get into this conversation. When you talk about culture and hockey culture, Megan, that was actually one of the things that upset me, among several things that were upsetting about countless things that were upsetting about this whole case and this entire situation that we've watched unfold now for the last number of years. For me personally, the way that people say like, oh well, that's what hockey culture is. Not from my perspective. This gave hockey a bad name. My whole life has taken place within the hockey world. This is not the hockey culture that I know. Some of the best people in my life come from being in this sport. Some of the most kind, giving people that I know are from this community. And it was so frustrating and upsetting to me that, this became something that people felt was reflective of hockey culture as a whole. And that was something that upset me about, again, that was one of the many things that upset me about what they did. It's like how dare you put that onto all of us? Everyone who's like you and me, made a living in this community, built our lives around this community. It was something really frustrating. I just hope that this isn't something that people think, oh, well, that's just what all hockey players do. That's the way that the hockey community acts. And it's like, 'cause it's not from my perspective.
Yeah, I personally find that people are more dismissive of this being representative of hockey culture as a whole. And I'd caution people from being too quick to readily dismiss the significance of exposing this, bringing it to the light so that it can be eradicated from the sport.
And
because as a woman,
because it doesn't belong in this sport.
No,
that's my whole point, is like, this is not, sorry.
I love hockey with my whole heart. I know you do too. And so sometimes aspects of this sport can be heartbreaking, but it doesn't stop you from loving all of the good that hockey has provided to you. And for me as well, it still is my whole heart. But as a woman, I can think back to baby Megan in high school, having some girlfriends who were off in college sharing stories with me about things that they'd seen, experienced, heard at rookie parties in junior hockey around the USHL. And the MO of some of what they described almost identical to what is alleged to have happened in this World Juniors Hockey Canada 2018 case. And it is disturbing because it is familiar to me. And it is not as if my girlfriends shared this with me in any formal capacity to fledge a complaint and sought to gain something in sharing this with me other than to warn me. It was that word of mouth thing that women do when we share stories with one another. And so this case is disturbing to me because I've heard it before. And that does not immediately point to guilt, right? That's the other important thing about sexual assault and how we talk about it is you're going to have to use discernment, your judgment, and think critically with every unique circumstance. But there are also broader realities around sexual assault that are backed by statistics that are important to consider as well. But it's important to stay curious, like I said at the top. So anyways, all that to say, I don't think hockey culture is rotten through and through, but there are parts of it that we have to drag front and center and expose for what it is, because I think that is the way to begin removing it from the sport.
Well, and so with that, let's get into it. But that was exactly the point that you made it much more eloquently, elegantly than I did. Of like that what you just said. This is not what hockey culture is, top to bottom, and it's something that, like I was saying earlier, I think exposed a real vulnerability in the coming up process, and the way that players leave home, and they're kind of to their own devices to teach themselves and grow and all that stuff. And to your point, the reason we're talking about it on this show is because we want to make sure that we're talking about it, because we don't want to see this be part of a community that has speaking for myself, and I know you feel, has given me so much. So let's just get into it. And like I said, I for many of the reasons she was laying out earlier with her credentials and all that, and the fact that Meghan, you did follow this really closely from the beginning. I will be giving Meghan the floor a lot on this. And also because I really do, Meghan, I think this is the type of case that is easy to get for folks to get emotional and wrapped up and feel really, and I've felt from the very beginning, because you and I have talked about this a lot off air. You've been very, not that you're not a level-headed person in general, but like, you've been very level-headed. I've thought you've been very fair. You've been critical of, during the trial process, you've been critical of a lot of different angles. And I loved what you wrote right after the verdict came down, because I agreed with you very closely with what you had written. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, just brief synopsis. Let's see. It was July 24th was when the verdict came down. Michael McLeod, Carter Hart, Alex Formanton, Dylan Dubé, and Cal Foote were found. They were acquitted on prosecutors could not meet the onus of proof for the charges filed against those 5 players. All 5 players had pleaded not guilty since earlier in the year, so the onus of proof was on the prosecution to prove that this happened, and not only that this happened, but that it happened without consent. There were multiple juries that were dismissed in this case, which left it to ultimately be decided by Supreme Court Justice Maria Caracia, right?
Yes.
I rehearsed saying that last name about 5 times before we started, and I still had to double check. A really weird case, really, Meghan, from start to finish. Again, in terms of the way that it proceeded in court. And before we go further, I just want to make sure that I give this distinction. This trial and what we're about to talk about, none of what's disputed is, did this night happen or not? That is not disputed. The players all say that it happened. There's video of it happening. All of this was about the question of consent. So with that, Meghan, I know you were wanting to give a Spark Notes version of let's go all the way back to 2018. So I'll kind of turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think the reason I wanted to lay some of the groundwork for the complications of this case is because it's pretty multidimensional, and it also happened 7 years ago. So that already invites some variables that are going to impact the nature of this trial, the way in which it unfolds. But going back to 2018, there's an initial London police investigation, And we have some information around that from London Police Service Sergeant Stephen Newton and some of what players and EM told him at that time.
EM is
the complainant.
Yes.
And so that gave us a body of information to work off of. Then in 2022, there was a civil case that was settled with Hockey Canada and EM, and that invited a lot of public scrutiny because it also revealed that Hockey Canada was using some of its funding to pay out sexual assault cases. And that obviously put Hockey Canada on the map in a worse way. That prompted this investigation being reopened. And around this time, Hockey Canada also hired an independent investigator, Danielle Robitaille, to conduct her own investigation. And that led to additional interviews with players and EM that yielded even more information and different accounts of what is alleged to have happened on this night. And then there's, of course, this 2025 trial, which only one player took to the stand, Carter Hart. But there's testimony on behalf of EM throughout this trial that has added now just like a third layer of information. And so what's complicated too is not all of this information was rendered admissible in court. And so I'll refer to that when I'm talking about Justice Carosia's read from the bench in her decision, because she is not operating off of the information that you and I are operating off of. She has to consciously remove this information from consideration, which makes it challenging then and understandable that the burden of proof was not met in this case. I think that's my personal perspective. It's a hard pill to swallow, understandably, for people who listen to the details of this case, and we can get into that a little bit more in a second, but keeping in mind, there are pieces of information that Justice Carosia just could not consider in her deliberation. And that absolutely shapes then the outcome of this case. But in having then 3 layers of information, there are a lot of inconsistencies. There are ways in which players have implicated themselves, or information that has been omitted earlier in 2018, for example, is meaningful and troubling. All that to say, there is a lot to juggle then in grappling with how you feel about this case. So understandably, it took me just 3 hours to sit with the testimony last night and then additional research on top of that. And that's not the first time I've engaged with this case, you know? So there's so much time that could be spent poring over the information because there's so much. But I want to start with what I feel is at the heart of this case and what I find to be most important to discuss today, because I want it to be a productive and educational conversation as well. Assistant Crown Attorney Heather Donkers said in court that this case is about consent, and equally important, it is about what is not consent. And I find that definition of consent that I alluded to at the top of the show to be the core of this case. And so I pulled the legal definition of consent from the Department of Justice Canada because I find it to be very robust. It's going to sound so funny reading it aloud, but Section 273.1 provides definition of consent for the purposes of the sexual assault offenses, and for greater certainty sets out specific situations that do not constitute consent at law. Subsection 273.11 defines consent as the voluntary agreement of the complainant to engage in the sexual activity in question. Conduct short of a voluntary agreement to engage in sexual activity does not constitute consent as a matter of law. For greater certainty, subsection 273.12 sets out specific situations where there is no consent in law, no consent is obtained. This is the important part. Where the agreement is expressed by the words or conduct of a person other than the complainant. So to be clear, no consent is obtained if any of the following are met. Where the complainant is incapable of consenting to the activity, where the accused induces the complainant to engage in the activity by abusing a position of trust, power, or authority, where the complainant expresses by words or conduct a lack of agreement to engage in the activity, or where the complainant, having consented to engage in sexual activity, expresses by words or conduct a lack of agreement to continue to engage in the activity. What has been tough about...
There was like 3 of those that I
Well, and the one
or
I
that I
key
feel like
in on
apply to what we're.
is the one about where the accused induces the complainant to engage in the activity by abusing a position of trust, power, or authority. Now, what's tough about this case, too, is I'll just give that information to people for a second, and I'll pivot to a second to give a little more insight to the decision read from the bench that Justice Maria Carrassia provided when she did give this verdict. She cited a lack of proof beyond a reasonable doubt and criticized the complainant's credibility and reliability in the case. She said, in this case, I have found actual consent. I do not find the evidence of EM to be either credible or reliable. As an example of some of these issues related to credibility, Carrassia said that EM testified she weighed 120 pounds, despite records showing she was 138. EM had explained she was just sticking to what she had estimated previously, and the judge interpreted it as untruthful. Carrassia also questioned how drunk EM could have been, as videos did not show any obvious signs of impairment, such as stumbling, and suggested she initiated touching with McLeod at the bar, despite having initially said she did not. In the ruling, Carrassia said that EM's testimony was laced with inconsistencies and that EM had exaggerated her level of intoxication on the night of the alleged assault. Carrassia also said EM had numerous gaps in her memory about the events connected to the alleged incident, and that EM had filled those memory gaps with her own assumptions. Carrassia noted that on several occasions, EM had used the phrase, "I feel that," to begin answering a question, a choice Carrassia said suggested an uncertain memory. Carrassia read through a number of examples of EM's inconsistent testimony and said, "I'm not satisfied that he invited the men into 209 without the knowledge of EM," he being McLeod, and that is referencing a text that was sent. She, at a later point, said, although the slogan "Believe the Victim" has become popularized as of late, it is no place in a criminal trial. To approach a trial with the assumption that the complainant is telling the truth is the equivalent of imposing a presumption of guilt on the person accused of sexual assault and then placing a burden on him to prove his innocence. This is antithetical to the fundamental principles of justice enshrined in our Constitution and the values underlying our free and democratic society. So that is kind of a recap of why Justice Maria Carrassia did not feel the burden of proof had been met.
Well, and in my opinion, let me know if you agree or disagree. It's why I used the phrase earlier, an unsurprising verdict. When you read through those, this is a tough case to prove. 7 years ago, beyond a reasonable doubt to one person. This isn't a jury; it's the judge. So I just wanted to make sure that was that's why I used that phrase. This wasn't shocking when the verdict came out this way, especially when you read what Judge Carrassia had to say.
I find some of her reasoning to be subjective, and it is in a way that I find harmful to not just EM, but the greater perception that at this point is well documented and exists around how we treat cases of sexual assault. For example, it is not just that she found evidence of EM to be as intoxicated as she claimed insufficient, because I would agree, like my personal perspective is that it's inconclusive. I can't say with confidence whether or not EM was extremely intoxicated or not. I find that a difficult thing to discern just from video. And even the inconsistencies in her testimony about how much she had to drink, even the amount that she had to drink, to clarify. She said something around the lines of 8 Jaeger shots, and the bar came forward and said their shot glasses are actually half-sized, and so it actually would have amounted to 4 Jaeger shots. At 120 or 138 pounds, I don't care. That discrepancy and the way in which women's bodies process alcohol, we are often told it's a drink per hour, but for women, given just our body fat distribution, it actually amounts to about 2. Even 4 shots in an 138-pound woman is about an 8-hour window of the body still processing alcohol. So that doesn't immediately point to conclusively that she was extremely intoxicated, but it gives me plausible reason that she could have been. So I find it irresponsible then to point to this consciousness that EM had in lying about her level of intoxication. That is very different from saying, I found the evidence of her intoxication insufficient. But to then point to her and accuse her of drumming this up and being dishonest about it is a very different accusation altogether. And I find that problematic.
Well, and then for me, and I don't know, maybe I'm did she know that they were half like, that could have been a truthful answer. I took 8 shots. Well, actually they were half. It's like, I didn't know that. I took 8. Like, how am I supposed to know? Like, so to your point, that's just another one for me where it's like, well, to say she was lying, like, I don't necessarily agree that she was lying. She just maybe, if the bar had to come forward and be like, oh, no, they're acting like, to her it was 8 and she was feeling the way she was feeling.
I find it to be inserting accusatory and inflammatory suggestion where it could have been so much more clinical and matter of fact on behalf of Justice Carosia. And so I then question her motives in presenting it in that way. Similarly, volunteering this insight around the slogan "Believe the Victim" and how it's become popularized as of late is an interesting choice, in my opinion, because Justice Carosia is right. This is quite a phrase that people use around cases of sexual assault, and it has become more widely used on the heels of the Me Too movement. But I find her volunteering this without any context as to why it became a popular coin of phrase, only to dismiss it. I also find that to be irresponsible because she frames it in a way that is pretty objectively repelling to anybody that would hear it. Because to anybody who is a discerning person, believing all women would be a difficult statement to get behind and throw your full backing and support. But I interpret believe women or believe the victim a bit differently, and I would invite us to reframe what it means to believe something and what our interpretation of belief is. And understandably, inside a court of law, you operate within different parameters. But culturally, there's significance to this phrase that I think is omitted in how she chose to present it in a way that I also find irresponsible, to be honest with you. So there's a difference between believing in something in the way that somebody might believe in their religion and their faith. It can be kind of an all-consuming, full send belief, right? That would be the type of belief that is probably not appropriate when people say believe women. But then there's another type of belief, like believing in aliens, for example. You probably don't wake up every day thinking about aliens, but you entertain the possibility that they could exist. And you might even lean on some science to affirm this belief, right? Like, we've found proof of life, extraterrestrial life. Like, who am I to think I'm the only being in this universe? Yeah, I believe in aliens. It's opening the possibility of belief. And there's context for why it is important to save space to believe in the possibility that a victim is telling the truth. It doesn't mean that you take their word to be indisputable fact. But what I have found true of this case is that testimony from the players has been used to counter some of what EM has said. And I find both need to be weighted equally. And so one is not indisputable fact over the other to disprove the other. And that's what it means then to hold space in the possibility of believing a victim when they come forward. And understandably, in a court of law, the presumption of innocence until guilt is proven is an important tenet of our justice system. So it does still exist at odds with this expression, but to present it without any context has me questioning, again, Justice Maria Carosia's motives in volunteering this information without any additional context. And I find that to be problematic as well.
Yeah, like, my number one issue with what you're talking about, and you and I have discussed this, the way this trial went, there was 2 separate juries dismissed that ultimately ended up with one person making the decision. And, you can feel, people out there watching, listening, you can feel however you want to feel about what the verdict was. Where I just find like an inherent issue with this is like, yeah, but the justice system isn't really supposed to work where one person, where the court decides your fate. No, it's supposed to be a jury of your peers. There's supposed to be discussion and points and counterpoints and deliberation and all of that. So to your point of what you're talking about, to leave it to one person to interpret it how they're going to interpret it, that to me is where one of my broader issues is with exactly what you're talking about.
It is tough because humans are fallible, and
Yeah.
we are all guilty of implicit bias. And it's important to stay conscious of that fact and check in with our own inherent biases. And so even the people who investigate cases of sexual assault, the people who make up the juries that ultimately decide, or the judges who ultimately decide, are all human and are all fallible and capable then of unconsciously inserting implicit bias. And so I don't know if this is conducive to our timing, but there are studies that have been done, not just around juries, but around law enforcement officials and around judges and just generally people within the legal system, legal representatives, that support that these biases do creep into the way in which we interpret sexual assault cases. I won't go into the study because that feels a little bit wordy, but it's a 2008 study from Professor Temkin and Professor Krahi that was backed by, let me go here, the German Science Foundation, if anyone is interested in some of the findings that specifically keys on the way in which bias affects even legal representatives. I think I wanted to key in on the issue of consent in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what I'll do too is just read some details from the trial, which is disturbing. This is the part that I think people should have some caution around. But I want to talk about the initial impact of the original investigation with London Police Service Sergeant Stephen Newton. Newton testified that even though he obtained surveillance from Jack's bar, he never reviewed the video. He also said that even though he obtained EM's clothing from the night of the alleged sexual assault, he never sent that clothing to experts for forensic testing. Newton testified that he did not secure any search or production orders as part of his investigation and was never aware of a June 26 group chat involving players connected to the incident. He also testified that he never became aware of the text messages sent by McLeod to his teammates in the early morning hours of June 19th, inviting them to take part in the three-way in his hotel room. He also never obtained a text message from Jake Bean to Dubé saying there was food in McLeod's hotel room. Just want to present this kind of at once. So that is obviously some flaws in the original investigation. There is a detail in the trial around a butt slap. There are differences in what is reported around this butt slap, but Tyler Steenbergen, who was called to testify, said it wasn't hard, but it didn't seem soft either. Steenbergen testified that Calfoot and Dylan Dubé both phoned him after learning Hockey Canada was conducting an investigation into the alleged sexual assault and asked him not to reveal what he had seen those players do the night of the alleged incident. In explaining her decision, Justice Caracia said that unlike traditional statements, Brett Howden's texts, which were deemed inadmissible, were not sent under oath or while being recorded, and that he was scared, nervous, and not attempting to be factual at the time he sent the message. Howden has said that he did not remember the incidents described in his text, but believed he was being truthful when he wrote them. Those texts include, let's see, I just want to find them, because we do have this information, even though it wasn't included in Justice Caracia's.
I mean, Howden was someone that, as it was all going on, I kept saying to you, like, how did this guy sidestep an indictment? And there's obviously a lot more context to that and all that. But to your point, there was a lot of text messages and a lot of exchanges between Howden and other players that especially there was like a week where Howden had to testify multiple days in a row. And I just, heavily involved. But to your point, the bulk of that stuff was not admissible.
He said, dude, I'm so happy I left when all that shit went down. Ha ha, man. When I was leaving, Duber was smacking this girl's ass so hard, it looked like it hurt so bad. In 2018, Howden told police that that was when I was leaving the room. I just heard her kind of weeping. Howden told Robitaille, the Hockey Canada investigator. I didn't know what was going on. I just went to my room because I didn't want to be a part of anything. In 2022, he testified, I do remember once seeing the smack. Howden told Robitaille. That was drawing a line for me to leave because I'd felt uncomfortable to that point. And then once I'd seen that, I just wanted to be out of there. Wow, this is a weird way that I wrote it. But he also said, I just remember once I heard it, that was my time to go. I was just not enjoying myself, obviously. That was basically the thing that finally pushed me out the door. Obviously, that's disturbing, and that not being factored into the ultimate decision, it's understandable then how that would not be enough to clear the burden of proof. But honestly, there's more at play here. Going back to the issue of consent and the definition that we read aloud from the Department of Justice in Canada, it is an objective fact that there were more men in this room than there was EM. And the report of how many men were in that room is pretty consistent, right? Like EM testified it was perhaps as many as 10, and the players said between 8 or 9. That is a significant fact alongside the fact that they're athletes and they're being recognized for their skill on the ice. They are at the height of their athletic careers, on the brink of turning pro. They are not just highly skilled athletes. They're strong, they're young, they're capable, and they outnumber EM. Now, this is the part that gets a bit subjective, but when I'm thinking about how somebody can obtain consent in that situation, there is a clear power imbalance that is obvious to me. And there is implied threat of harm, which, again, it's a subjective thing. It's not as if we have a unit of measure to weigh what that threat of harm actually is. In EM's testimony, she claims that there were golf clubs in the room and that players said things to her about ways that they would use the clubs and the golf balls against her. Now, this is testimony, so we don't know conclusively if that is factual. Right. But Dylan Dubé did tell police in 2018 that while receiving oral sex, he was holding a golf club. So it is pretty disturbing. Yeah. Alongside that, there are inconsistencies in the testimony then of the players between those 3 layers that this has seen through this point. Megan Cunningham, the Crown attorney, said that there were at least 15 inconsistencies in Brett Howden's testimony alone. When Michael McLeod first spoke with the London police in 2018, he didn't say that EM asked him to invite his Team Canada teammates back to his hotel room to engage in group sex. After consensual sex, he reports that players just started kind of appearing in the room. He went down to get his Uber Eats order, came back, and suddenly they were engaged in sexual acts with EM. That is what he told the police in 2018. Which is obviously very different from what we know to be true about the texts that were sent inviting teammates up for a 3-way. There were additional texts sent alongside this. Carter Hart texted Dante Fabro, inviting him to come up to receive oral sex. Taylor Radish was texted by Michael McLeod separately, inviting him up to the room to receive oral sex. There's a lot of gray area then around where EM is in providing consent to these messages that are being sent out. There's inconsistencies in Dubé's testimony for the length of time that some of these sexual acts are alleged to have occurred. Carter Hart, one of the only players to take the stand, had some inconsistencies in the words that were exchanged with EM alongside what others testified hearing seeing, what EM has testified hearing seeing. It's enough to make you feel at most, at worst, at best, inconclusive around the nature of this case, in my opinion. It's also enough to be disturbed by it. McLeod absolutely introduced a no video rule to make sure nobody was taking videos. No videos, guys, be smart about this. Obviously, they take videos. There's 2 videos in question that are significant to this case. And
can I just add something right here?
Yes.
Before you go? That to me, of everything, because, Megan, I really do. And as you just pointed out, there was a lot that was presented in this case that I do think, as you just said, ultimately does land you at inconclusive at best, or to me, the thing that just stuck out to me is all this was unfolding. And a lot of what you're about to get into, and I see a couple people in the chat talking about it. There was a lot of steps that were taken, in my opinion, by the players involved, where it's like, you only do that if you know you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. If you know you're doing something that isn't right, if you know you're doing something that could get you in trouble. And that was the part to me that and again, I don't know, I wasn't in the courtroom every day, but like it felt like there was some of that stuff that didn't get enough air of like, why are you doing that? No one I know does that in a normal, sexual encounter. No, hey, everyone be smart. What? You agree to this, right? Yeah. Say you agree to this. Like there were several things that I just, and like you said, I don't necessarily know if that's stuff that could be considered like concrete convict them based on this, but at best, at worst, I don't know. We're having a hard time figuring out the right way to say this.
I know, because nothing about this is everything good.
But like, at the most, it's you guys knew you were doing something that probably wasn't okay based on your own behavior in the moment.
It is interesting, right? Like part of Brett Howden's testimony was how difficult it was to share this with his dad, that this had happened. But those videos, these are a really important part of the case that people refer to for a lot of different reasons. In one video filmed by McLeod just after 3 a.m., McLeod said, "You're okay with this though, right? You're okay with this?" EM responded, "I'm okay with this." In a second video filmed at 4:26, McLeod said, "Say it." EM answered, "This was all consensual. Are you recording me? Okay, good." After McLeod said, "What else?" EM responded, "You're so paranoid. Holy, I enjoyed it. It was fine. I'm so sober. That's why I can't do this right now." My issue with this is consent is supposed to be enthusiastic, voluntary, consistent. Being baited into the consent video. You're okay with this though, right? You're okay with this? And say it. What else is not
right? And that's what I'm saying.
Acknowledging the coercive context of the way in which these consent videos were filmed.
Right.
And so on the whole, this is the part that I think Justice Carosia missed the mark in addressing more so was the coercive context of this whole night. That, the presence of the players outnumbering EM. And so I'm not even including alcohol in this part of the conversation, right? Like I found that to be inconclusive, though still not ruled out of being part of the equation. I find the number of men in that room to be intimidating and to exist as some sort of threat of harm. And I find the coercive nature of the way in which these videos were recorded to be coercive. And that is troubling to me then in trying to identify if consent was properly given and obtained. And so to me, that's still a part that hasn't been satisfied in this case, but that's not how the court of law works, right? Like it was, can we prove that they were guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt? And that burden of proof was not met. It's a high bar to clear, especially in cases of sexual assault. But to those of us thinking about this case at home and how we want to talk about it, we get to decide if we feel that their innocence was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. And I find there to be too much about this case that is inconclusive to say that with any sort of confidence to then endorse the character of these men and any sort of return to hockey past this point. Because like you said, this is something that was on my mind. Because I've seen some people suggest that this notion of recording consent videos is part of media training that players receive. And what's tough is there isn't a standardized like media training that all young players receive. And I find it to be most involved when they get closer to that pro level, like at development camps, is when players are receiving a lot of these educational tools. I think now there's a shift to providing this education sooner, but what I don't have any basis for is if this has ever been a part of formal education that players are receiving.
Are you saying that you've seen people suggest that players will be taught to get consent videos?
And what I'm unclear on too is if they're suggesting that they're explicitly told to get the videos, or if they're just explicitly told you need to get consent and be really sure about it.
And this is going to be a weird parallel to draw here. But again, in the, I think we were talking about with like the character and being considered to return to hockey. And again, I go back to what you're talking about the consent video. And it's like, if it's actually something that's consensual and you know you've done nothing wrong, that's probably not even something that's going through your head. And the parallel that I'm going to draw here, do you remember this was several years ago? Jaromir Jagr was blackmailed.
Sorry, it's not funny.
No. Do you know what I'm talking about,
though? I do.
Was blackmailed by that younger woman who's, I believe, 18. She was in a relationship, and the morning after her and Jaromir Jagr had spent the night together, she took a picture of him sleeping, and she told him, if you don't pay me X amount of money, I'm going to release this photo. Jaromir Jagr knew that he hadn't done anything wrong. So it was like, release it then. I don't have anything to hide. This was all consensual. We both, do it. Where I'm going with that is, to me, if you're having to get a video of something, it's because you're nervous something that you're doing isn't right, and you're trying to get ahead of it. And that, to me, was the part that wasn't the part that was concerning, but like that to me was where this became like pretty obvious. Like, oh, clearly they were up to something they shouldn't have been. I've told you before, Megan, when we've talked about this, like I don't even doubt that at one point in the night, this was a consensual encounter between her and McLeod. I don't doubt that at all. But at a certain point, it is obvious, to me at least, that this tipped over into something very different, and that them feeling the need to do what they did, not only with the videos, but then in the way that they attempted to cover their tracks after the fact, to me makes it pretty obvious you were doing something that you knew was wrong and that you could probably get in a lot of trouble for. And that was, for me, where I just saw all this, like, yeah, you said the character of these kids, if nothing else, is called massively into question.
Yeah. And
that's the lightest way I can possibly put that.
I hope too, given the fact that this isn't brand new information to me, in terms of having heard of other young hockey players engaged in similar behavior, I hope this is a wake-up call to just how reprehensible this behavior is. And I'm not even specifically addressing the issue of was consent given or not, but rather everything else that we just laid out. And there's two things I want to make mention of. One, that independent investigation with Danielle Robitaille was actually not also admissible in court, those interviews that she conducted. But I want to talk about why. Ontario Superior Court Justice Bruce Thomas said, these statements by these defendants, in my view, were achieved through such significant unfairness in a process that was an absolute no-win for them. Whether you call it compelled or coerced, they effectively were left with a choice, I suppose, but really no choice at all. The fashion in which Ms. Robitaille chose to obtain these statements leads me to the conclusion that it would render the trial process unfair if they were admitted. So you mean to tell me that with the pressure and threat of consequence to them professionally that was perceived in Robitaille getting these interviews, that they could be rendered coerced, compelled in a way that makes them inadmissible? But we allow these consent videos that were recorded under almost identical circumstances to be used. I find it interesting the way in which that logic was applied very differently. However, all that to say, we still have access to that information though, right? Like we still have access to Danielle Robitaille's interviews with these players around 2020 to consider in how we feel about this case. And so the other thing that someone in the chat had talked about too is just this quick cultural aspect of this that is important to acknowledge, because there are studies around like fraternities and group sports and the ways in which men in settings like this groupthink can lead to bad decisions, you know. It is important to acknowledge, too, the ways in which hockey holds significance in London, Ontario, population of 422,000 people. Hockey players are pedestalized and elevated in their status within their communities because of the importance of this sport. And again, I love it too, right? Like I like to hold these players to high regard when they represent themselves, their country very well. But that holds a place in this conversation too, contextually. The status of these players, and then in talking about the way in which they outnumbered EM, but also the implicit status that they held in being hockey players, and just taking a second to consider then the context of that and how it impacts this case.
Yeah, and you know, it loops back for me to what I was talking about off the top of. That was what I thought this exposed more than anything else is the flaw in, you know, not only do you leave home at a young age to go pursue an adult career. Like, you know, you're leaving home to go, you know, grow up and learn how to be a professional. And not only that, but to your point, Megan, and this is something you and I have talked about for several different reasons over the years that we've known each other, but a lot of these, especially in the CHL, a lot of these major junior teams are in small towns. So these players are kind of immediately celebrities. And what you'd hope is that they're going out and they're learning on these smaller stages how to be the best of us and have the most upstanding morals and to be the leaders and set the examples. And unfortunately, again, like I said, I think this was something that shined a light on the fact that that's not the case, that there's a lot of these kids who go to these small towns and don't get the guidance and education that they need. And it ends up turning into this really bad, backwards, I feel like I have no consequences because I'm the king of, damn it, I was going to say Brandon, but they're the Wheat Kings, and that seemed like way too much.
I'm the king of the Brandon Wheat Kings.
But you know what I'm saying?
I do.
I'm the king of London, Ontario. I'm beloved here. I'm 17 years old, and my face is on the Tim Hortons across the street from the arena. Like that to me was something that, if nothing else ends up coming out of this, has to be fixed with the way that young athletes are being brought up through this sport. There's just, we have to fix that. Cause I think I also think that hockey being different from the other sports, and it's not all about, you know, the NCAA and all that stuff, that there are these different paths. I think that's great. It's one of my favorite things about hockey. This exposed a major flaw.
It did, because, you know, in addressing and acknowledging the power that exists with these young men in their communities, it can be wielded for good. They can be tremendous ambassadors for this sport, representatives of this sport, and wear that maple leaf proudly, because this should be a shameful thing, a blight on Hockey Canada.
Yeah.
I think anybody too who will represent Team Canada, like going into the Olympics, should carry not the responsibility of what happened, but carry that in back of mind, the significance of what it means then to be a professional hockey player, to be a hockey player, and how you can leverage that for good in your communities through philanthropy and just generally having good character, even behind closed doors.
Yeah. Let's put a bow on this. Let's run this super chat through here from Vaguely, our guy, Vaguely Sober. We'll hit the green lights. Thank you for shining light on this. Like we said off the top, Megan, we just did not feel like it would be appropriate to act like it didn't happen. This is something that we felt needed to be discussed. Megan, do you have any final thoughts on this topic? We're running long today, but hey, sometimes you run long. It's Friday. Any final thoughts on this before we turn the page to getting back into overtime? We're not necessarily closing the page on this for good. If any more comes out about this, we're not afraid of talking about this topic. Anything else for today?
I want to speed run just a couple of facts.
Speed run them.
All right. The effect of fear, threat, or states of intense stress on memory can result in intensified memory recollection, or it can result in fragmented or impaired memories. Both are the result of stress hormones released when the defense circuitry is activated. This is reported on the Department of Justice Canada's website. Just thought that was a valuable piece of information to discuss. EM's credibility suffered due to perceived memory lapses or conflicting details. Despite well-documented trauma-related memory impacts, victims are often traumatized and they may report an incident many days after it occurred or have gaps in their memories. As such, their credibility and reliability may be questioned if they do not recall details about the incident. A lack of witnesses and the potential relationships between victims and perpetrators may create additional investigative challenges. Misconceptions about sexual violence and rape myths persist, further complicating the process of seeking justice. This is the Canadian Intergovernmental Conference Secretariat, and it also references a study, Barriers to Reporting Sexual Violence, a qualitative analysis of why I didn't report. And then the last one is just bringing back emphasis to the systemic failing in the initial investigation conducted by London Police in everything that I outlined at the top that was not considered or included in the initial investigation. That is one of the first hurdles that needs to be cleared in a more effective way if we want to see this gap in the low conviction rate alongside what we know to be true about the frequency at which sexual assaults occur to ever be closed, to ever be reconciled. There are a lot of other hurdles that exist within this case, and a lot of them are cultural for us to tackle in having these types of conversations.
I love it. And Megan, like I said, I from the moment this verdict broke, I really appreciated your perspective on it. That's why I wanted to make sure we talked about it here on the show, because I do think it's highly relevant to what you and I do every day. So let's put a bow on that for now, and we're gonna go a little bit longer today. I apologize, John. We're gonna keep you in that seat a little bit longer than normal, but we do want to make sure that we end the day and the week on a little bit more of a light note, and we're gonna get into the schedule a bit here for the Colorado Avalanche. So let's take 5 seconds to reset here. We're gonna break down. Take 15 minutes, 20 minutes to break down the Colorado Avalanche 2025-2026 schedule. Okay, we're resetting here. We're moving our attention back to the NHL, back to the Colorado Avalanche. We appreciate you guys giving us the space to talk about all of that. And again, I hope you listen to the episode, you take some away from it. But if it wasn't an episode for you, or you wanted to skip to this portion of it, we understand. But I do think, Megan has been all over this. So I really appreciate her insight on everything. And again, just appreciate you guys giving us a chance to talk about it. Megan, Avs. I'm going to go as far to say I actually think that this is one of the more team-friendly schedules that we've seen in at least the last handful of years. Like I go back to the even the season immediately after they won the Stanley Cup. They have a banner raising ceremony. That's the last game of the night on national television. Then they are immediately onto a plane for an early start the next night in Minnesota. And it just feels like they've had several seasons like that. You got 3 afternoon games in October. This feels like they're, for as much as you can be, the back end is going to be brutal. October to January, not terrible for the Avs this year. Have you had a chance to look over? Do you have any things that stuck out to you? Because for me, it's the afternoon game on Halloween. Could not be more excited.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I haven't really sat with the schedule a lot. It's one of those things it's God's will. You know what I mean? It's in God's hands. I'm just going to show up when they're playing. I will be there, and I should think more critically about the schedule and its impacts, because I've always tried to figure out how, to me, Colorado feels like such a destination for players. Who wouldn't want to come play here? And then occasionally you'll hear oh, the Avs are in on JT Miller, or the Avs are in on Claude Giroux, and they obviously didn't win out, couldn't make a compelling case. And so I'm sitting here well, what is it that's not doing it for them about Colorado? And I think sometimes the travel in the West specifically is such a difficult aspect of just playing in this conference. And I think there's so many more factors than just that.
The
But
Avs will be 7th this coming season in terms of miles traveled, and 2 of the teams ahead of them are going to Sweden.
okay.
So they're up there.
It reinforces then that the travel can just be a little bit brutal, right? Crossing time zones, it's just probably tough on the body.
Not a lot of mountain time zone teams. You play very few games within your own time zone.
And that is probably challenging on the body, where so much of the sport too, I think athletes want to have every microscopic advantage possible. That I imagine then where I'm going with this is this schedule is more significant than I have given it credit for, especially to the athletes themselves. So that's just kind of my broad strokes take on it. But if we want to key in on like some specific months and some specific afternoons or back-to-backs.
Let me run through some. I'm going to run through just my highlights.
What site are you on? Like
I'm just on NHL.com.
Find the best way.
And see, I've got it printed out upstairs with notes, and I should have brought that down for you.
I'm a big picture girl, and so it's like hard for me to look at 1 month at a time. I want to see everything.
I've got the whole thing with notes written out up top, upstairs. I should have brought it down. But let me just kind of run through. I'll give you what my key dates are when I've gone through this.
Yes.
For each month, and you can give me your thoughts. So opening week of the regular season for the Avs. Weird preseason schedule this year. Games are really spaced out. There's one day where they play split squad, which counts for 2 of their 6 games, and there's like a large gap. So first week of the regular season, they kick off in LA on a Tuesday, national TV, 1-game road trip out in LA, coming straight back home for the home opener 2 nights later against a newly minted Utah Mammoth. And then that Saturday, the Moose comes back to town. Mikko Rantanen and the Dallas Stars round out that first week. Then on Monday, October 13th, 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time as they take on the Buffalo Sabres in Buffalo. 10:30 a.m. on a Monday. I love it. Then you've got a 1 p.m. Saturday against Boston on the 25th. Then you've got an 11 a.m. in New Jersey on the 26th. And then to round out the month, you've got a 2 p.m. on Halloween in Vegas. Sign me up all day for that game.
Interesting. Okay, I'm tracking now. I was looking at the Boston game at home where they played at 7, and I couldn't see the 1 p.m. afternoon time. They're on the road. A week later. Okay, I think I'm tracking now. Aw.
Are you a big Halloween gal?
I love Halloween, and I love when we get little nibbles of what the team wears for their Halloween costumes at their party. And I think it's challenging, though. I think they do operate around the schedule a lot, and kind of, it hampers their ability to go full out, all out.
Totally.
But that's not where my priorities should lie.
Yeah, I love that the NHL is doing afternoon games for Halloween. Like I have always thought those were weird games to be at that night, especially players have kids and things like that.
Yeah.
Granted, this game's on the road, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
bring the family.
Bring the fam. Trick or treat up and down the strip. So a few years ago, I went to Finland for the Global Series, which was right around this time of year. And my wife actually went with me. She was my girlfriend at the time. And we went to Amsterdam first. We had both been there like in the past, and we just really liked that city. So we went back there and we were like, oh shit, we're going to be in Amsterdam on Halloween. I'll bet you that's going to be crazy. They don't really do Halloween in Europe.
Oh,
so thankfully, like we didn't like leave the hotel like crazy dressed up. Yeah, but it was like we got there and I was expecting to see like some decorations. And like on Halloween morning, we like went out to like a pub for lunch, not in the morning, but like for lunch. There was like nothing happening. And we were like, oh, is this just another night here? Okay.
That made me a little sad.
It made me really sad. Then you move into November. And again, you have 2 more afternoon games, one of them on a Friday. At home at 1:30, but then it's a back-to-back the very next day. You're in Minnesota at 1:30, and the very next day you're back at home at 1:00 taking on the Canadians. But more or less, you've got a 3-day break here, 2-day break, another 3-day break, 2-day break. For as condensed as the schedule gets later post Olympic break, really, Megan, the Avs are going to get through the first couple months with not that grueling of a schedule, and you're going to have already played 6 afternoon games.
Yeah.
By the end of by the time you are past Thanksgiving. Again, just for a team that has had some really weird road trips to start the season the last couple of years, I think if you're Nathan McKinnon, you got to be looking at this going, okay.
Well, especially because he's not that into morning skate.
Right.
But
right,
that's where
right.
I'm going with my question here is we like afternoon games. How do players feel about that?
So I've asked a lot of them because I'm usually going like when we're leading up to an afternoon game, I'm usually in great spirits.
Yes.
And so like I'll be in the locker room and I've asked several guys like, do you guys like this? I have not found a single player who has said they don't. There was one player who is no longer here who said sometimes they can kind of throw me out of my routine. But thus far, everybody I have polled, players, coaches, and equipment staff, all say they prefer these because they don't like having to come to the rink, do morning skate, leave, and then come back. And Nate went on a podcast 2 summers ago and talked about that he likes afternoon games because he can't nap on game days anyways. So he just likes to get to the rink and get going.
Okay. And this feels very Nate specific, but I believe it.
Yeah.
It's probably true. Just the disruption in the day of morning skate. But I don't know. I wonder if some players.
I'm sure there's players that have their
the optional, like really like the routine. I am such a routine person.
Yeah.
I think I'd struggle with that a little.
Routine queen.
I hate that I said that.
I said
you said it and it was normal. I said it.
You added some stank to it.
It was weird.
The Avs kick off December, 1 game at home, and then they hit that East Coast road trip that we always see every year, Megan. The Islanders, the Rangers, the Flyers usually swap the Flyers for the Devils, and that's usually the 3-game East Coast trip that they do. But again, 2 afternoon games there, 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time at the Rangers, and then the very next day, 11 a.m. at the Flyers. A lot of afternoon games and a normal amount of back-to-backs for them this season, 12. But I think if you're talking afternoon game, especially in a situation like that, that is not one you're going to complain about. You're going to get to Philly by 6 p.m., be able to get a full night's rest and be able to get up and go. That's why when I go through this, I just, especially for these first few months, I don't see many stretches where it's like, oof, that's a gauntlet. You're going to have to really, hunker down here. I think they've got a pretty favorable schedule through 2025 heading into the new year.
I think that will make a difference too in how we talk about the team, just because there was a noticeable struggle leading up to the 4 Nations break this last year.
Yes.
The team was very clearly fatigued because of how it was loaded up just ahead of this break. And I think it impacted some individual player performances, and it's why we saw this improvement in players coming back, and similarly fatigue in the players who didn't get the break.
Yep.
And I think that led to kind of mixed results then in the back half of the season. But given they have some challenges to address, at least as of right now, August 1st, I think the start of the season can be tough, right? Like this last year, they didn't have Arturi Lehkonen, they didn't have Val Nichushkin, they kind of had to weather that storm. They won't have Logan O'Connor to start this year, and we still need to see how that third line comes together. That hopefully having maybe some ease of schedule in the beginning where they're still figuring some of these things out is a good thing for the Avs in terms of driving positive results that put a little less pressure then on the back half of the season.
Well, and you're going to get some good practice days. I remember that's something Jared Bednar talked about this past season of like, we haven't even been able to get on the ice to practice.
They were avoiding us.
They were, seriously. Real quick, let's throw that comment up there. What can I say? Yeah, whatever. Fuck it.
I think it's fine because one, the cat's out of the bag, at least in a rumor capacity. Like people are talking about it already. And I'm getting DMs about it.
Yeah.
So you can present it in this way, like, you know what? There might be some fire to this smoke.
My sources are telling me that yes, it does appear as if the Avs will be wearing a very Nordiques inspired third. And I hope you can all read through the stammering in my voice in the way I'm trying to get this out without saying anything I'm not supposed to.
Hypothetically, that sounds very cool.
Hypothetically, it sounds awesome. And to your point, Megan, that smoke might just be legitimate. That smoke might be coming from a fire.
I love it. I loved the reverse retro, like for the Tahoe
so
outdoor series. Oh my gosh, those looked so freaking cool.
I to this day, and I'm sure it was something with the league, you know, I don't know why they haven't kept those around. Those were the best looking jerseys. It was the best looking kit in the NHL that season.
I agree. And I think they, like, the sales of it reflected that. So, you know, if I'm the league, I'm like, we got to capitalize on that, which maybe is how we got to this place of potentially a return of Nordiques jerseys.
But yes, I'll say you're on to something there with that comment. We'll leave it at that. The Avs do kick off January, a long homestand. It's going to be, I believe, their longest of the season. 7 straight games at home from January 8th all the way to January 23rd, including a 3-day break, as well as a 2-day break in there as well before they head out on the road for another East Coast swing. This one is going to include Canada. You got Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and then Detroit. 2 of those games being afternoons, and then just 2 games at the start of February, Megan, and then we hit a 20-day break for what are right now being presented as all-star festivities, followed immediately by the Olympics. Do you have a construction paper chain link in your house like I do, just counting down the days to the Olympics?
Oh, I don't, but I feel I need something now.
I'm so excited for the NHL to get back to the Olympics.
I am too. Gosh. I really am. I saw the success just of 4 Nations because the care that players approached it with. And so I almost fear then for the level of care that will exist with the Olympics. I think it'll be heightened. Like, there are already so many injuries. I just hope everyone's careful and everyone has fun. Yeah,
me too. I'm totally with you there. Watching the NHLers at the Olympics was one of my favorite hockey memories growing up, is watching those, you know, the USA Canada gold medal game, that Canadian super team where it seemed like Carey Price wouldn't give up a goal in 2014. You know, I loved it growing up. I remember watching the games in 2002 in Salt Lake. I loved watching the NHL, the Olympics. That said, when John Tavares got injured and missed the rest of the season in a year that the Islanders were really promising, I totally understood why the owners said, yeah, no more of that. The month of February does end with 3 games on the road in Utah, at home against Minnesota, and then at home against Chicago. So 5 total games in February, bookending an all-star, some type of all-star festivities and the Olympic break. And then it is after that, Megan, that things get a little bit bonkers. So like I said, you play February 25th, 26th, and 28th. And then you go for a California back-to-back, the 2nd and 3rd of March. You get 2 days off. And then starting March 6th, it is every other day all the way until April 2nd, in which case you get 2 days off.
This is crazy.
And then it's every other day the rest of the way. So between March 6th and the end of the season, the Avs get 1 multi-day break.
Oh, they're not going to practice.
Not going to practice.
No, give them to us.
So, and the season ends at home against the Seattle Kraken on April 16th. So about a week later than normally the season ends. But for as favorable as it feels the schedule is up until February, you make that up March and April, no doubt about it. Like I said, 1 multi-day break between March 6th and the end of the season.
Taylor McCarr debut. March Madness.
Honestly.
There's going to be so much fatigue. They're going to need to be resting guys. There's probably going to be inevitably injury that really happens.
I mean, the first game's
Clock it.
back from the Olympic break or back to back. It's Utah and Minnesota. First game's back.
That's Taylor McCarr music to me.
100%. And if not, then the back to back at the end of the season against the Oilers or Flames.
That feels more realistic.
I'm with you. I'm with you. One of those two.
The Alberta boy
Oh,
in Calgary.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. You heard it here. What's today? It's August 1st at 3:24 and 25 seconds. Taylor McCarr makes his NHL debut
On April 14th.
April 14th in Calgary.
Perfect.
Book it.
And Tate McRae performs.
Stop. All right. Anything that, we kind of stopped each month. Anything that just jumps out to you as you're looking through that you want to make mention of before we get out of here and let John out of the producer seat?
My birthday's on March 31st, in case anyone wants to know.
Perfect.
That's it.
That
Important
is
calendar notes. It's
no
always,
game.
So it's right around the Calgary game, like almost, at least going back a couple seasons now. They almost
Really?
always play Calgary around my birthday.
That's so interesting. They will at home at Calgary, at home against Calgary, and at home against Vancouver. Bookend your birthday.
Canada.
There's nothing on my birthday this year. They skipped it for preseason, which I'm fine with. Anything else?
That's it.
Anything else for today in general?
No.
That's going to do it, folks. Definitely a little bit long today, about an hour 25. Big shout out to John. For rolling with us there for the full hour 25. Thank you guys for sticking with us. We know this is a little bit of a different episode than what we normally do, but again, it was an episode we felt was important. We wanted to make sure we ended it on a little bit of a lighter note, sending everyone in the weekend feeling fully educated on the schedule. Education, important topic.
Education, so important.
Of today's pod. She's Meghan Angley. I'm Jesse Montano. John behind the glass. This is Guerrilla Sports Off Ice. We will be back at it next week as the off season rolls on. Let me plug it real quick. It came together super fast. Toby Peterson. I was very lucky before he ran out of town to head to Texas. I was able to catch up with Toby Peterson, the former skills coach for the Colorado Avalanche, new head coach of the AHL's Texas Stars. That is live right now on our YouTube channel. We haven't yet had a chance to promote it, clip it, anything, but we got it up there for you guys to go watch. Great conversation. I'm going to miss seeing Toby around, but I highly recommend you guys go listen to it and hear from Toby Peterson, the newest head coach of the AHL's Texas Stars, former skills coach for the Avalanche. That's going to do it for real this time. Jesse, Megan,
Bye.
John, take care, everybody. Have a great weekend. See ya.